The sun had not yet come up when Maria stepped off the bus that cold morning. Her breath made small clouds in the air as she walked the long path toward the Belmont estate. The big iron gates opened slowly, and she made her way up the driveway lined with tall trees. She had done this walk for 12 years now, every single day, rain or shine, summer or winter. It did not matter. Maria always showed up. She was 53 years old, though most people thought she looked older. Life had not been easy on her. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors and washing dishes. Her back ached most nights when she finally got home to her small apartment. But she never complained. Not once. Because Maria knew something that most people did not understand. She knew what it felt like to lose everything. And compared to that, a little back pain was nothing at all. The Belmont estate was one of the biggest and most beautiful homes in the entire state. It had 47 rooms, a swimming pool that looked like something from a movie, gardens that stretched for acres, and right in the center of the main floor, there was a ballroom. And in that ballroom stood a grand piano, a Steinway, black and shining and perfect. That piano was the reason Maria had stayed at this job for so long, every morning. Before anyone else in the house woke up, Maria would finish her first round of cleaning and find herself standing in front of that piano. She would look around to make sure no one was watching. Then, very quietly, she would lift the cover and let her fingers touch the keys. She never pressed hard enough to make a sound. She just touched them, felt them, remembered because a long time ago, in another life, Maria had been a pianist. She grew up in a small country far away from here. Her father was a carpenter, and her mother sold bread at the local market. They did not have much money, but they had love. And they had music. Maria's grandmother had an old piano in her home, and from the time Maria was just 4 years old, she would sit on that bench and play. At first, it was just noise, random keys pressed by tiny fingers. But soon, something changed. The noise became melodies. The melodies became songs. And the songs became something beautiful. By the time Maria was 10, everyone in her town knew her name. They called her the girl with golden hands. She played at weddings, at church, at town gatherings. People would cry when they heard her play, not because the music was sad, but because it was so full of feeling. Maria did not just play notes. She played emotions. She played stories. She played pieces of her own heart. When she was 18, Maria won a national competition. The prize was a scholarship to study music at a famous school in the capital city. Her parents cried with joy. Her grandmother held her face and said, "You were born for this, my child. Go and show the world what God has given you." And Maria did. She moved to the capital. She studied hard. She practiced for hours every single day until her fingers bled. And slowly, she began to make a name for herself. By the time she was 25, Maria had performed in some of the best concert halls in her country. Critics called her a rising star. People lined up to buy tickets to her shows. She fell in love with a kind man named Antoni, and they got married in a small church surrounded by their families. Life was perfect. Then the war came. It started with small things. News reports about trouble in the north. Soldiers moving through the streets. Curfews at night. But Maria and Antoni believed it would pass. They believed things would go back to normal. They were wrong. One night, the bombs came. Maria remembered the sound more than anything else. The whistling in the sky. The explosion that shook the ground. The screaming. She remembered running through the streets with Antoni, holding his hand so tight that her knuckles turned white. She remembered the fire and the smoke and the fear that filled every part of her body. They made it to the border after 3 days of walking. 3 days with no food, no water, No sleep. Maria's feet were bleeding. Her heart was broken. But she was alive. Antoni was alive. And that was all that mattered. Or so she thought. The refugee camp was crowded and dirty. Thousands of people packed together with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Maria and Antoni waited there for weeks, hoping for news, hoping for help. Then one day, Antoni got sick. It started as a cough, then a fever, then something worse. The camp did not have enough medicine. The doctors did not have enough time. And on a cold Tuesday morning, Antoni closed his eyes and did not open them again. Maria did not cry. She could not. The tears were stuck somewhere deep inside her, frozen by shock and grief. She sat by his body for hours until someone came and took him away. And just like that, everything she had ever loved was gone. She had no home, no family, no husband, and no music. Because how could she ever play again? How could her fingers create something beautiful when her whole world had turned to ashes? A charity organization helped Maria get to this country. They gave her a small room, some food, and help with paperwork. But they could not give her back her life. That she had to rebuild on her own. She took the first job she could find, cleaning houses. It was hard work, but Maria did not mind. She needed something to fill the hours, something to keep her hands busy so her mind would not wander back to the past. She moved from house to house, job to job, until one day she ended up at the Belmont estate. The moment she saw that grand piano in the ballroom, something inside her cracked. Just a little. Just enough to let a tiny bit of light through. She did not play it. She could not. But she cleaned it. Every single day. She polished the wood until it shone. She dusted the keys until they sparkled. And sometimes, when she was alone, she would sit on the bench and close her eyes and imagine. She imagined she was back on stage. She imagined the spotlight on her face and the crowd holding their breath. She imagined Antoni sitting in the front row, smiling at her with that smile that used to make everything okay. And in those moments, just for a few seconds, Maria felt like herself again. But then reality would come rushing back. The sound of footsteps. The voice of Mrs. Belmont calling for more towels. The reminder that she was not a pianist anymore. She was just the help. The invisible woman who cleaned and served and disappeared into the background. The guests at the estate never noticed her. They walked past her like she was part of the furniture. They laughed and drank and talked about their fancy lives while Maria picked up their dirty plates and wiped down their tables. Sometimes she would hear them complain about small things. A late flight, a bad meal, a dress that did not fit right. And she would think to herself, if only you knew. If only you knew what real problems looked like. But she never said anything. She just smiled and nodded and kept working. Because that was her life now. And she had made peace with it. Or at least, she thought she had. Because fate had other plans for Maria. Plans that would change everything. Plans that started on one ordinary evening when the impossible happened. And the invisible woman was finally seen. It was the biggest night of the year at the Belmont estate, the annual charity gala, an event that brought together the richest and most powerful people in the city. Politicians, business owners, famous actors, and people whose names appeared in magazines. They came dressed in designer suits and gowns that cost more than most people earned in a year. Diamonds sparkled under the chandeliers. Champagne flowed like water. And everyone was talking about one thing. The entertainment doc Mrs. Belmont had spent months planning this event. She was a woman who demanded perfection in everything. Her hair was always perfect. Her makeup was always perfect. Her house was always perfect. And tonight had to be perfect too. because tonight she had hired one of the most famous pianists in the world to perform. A man who had played for presidents and kings. A man whose concerts sold out in minutes. Getting him to agree to play at her gala had been her proudest achievement. She had told everyone about it. She had bragged about it at every lunch and every dinner party for the past 3 months. The guests started arriving at 7 o'clock. Maria watched them from the corner of the room as she arranged flowers on the tables. She saw the women in their beautiful dresses and the men in their expensive watches. She heard them laugh and talk about vacations in places she had only seen in pictures. A part of her felt a familiar sting. Not jealousy exactly, just a quiet sadness. A reminder of everything she had lost and everything she would never have. Maria pushed those feelings down like she always did. She had work to do. Tonight was going to be busy. Extra staff had been brought in to help, but Maria was still in charge of the ballroom. That meant making sure everything was in place. The chairs, the tables, the flowers, and of course, the piano. She had polished it 3 times that day. It stood in the center of the room like a sleeping giant, waiting to come alive. Maria looked at it and felt that familiar pull in her chest. That longing that never quite went away. She wondered what it would feel like to sit at that bench again. To really play. Not just touch the keys in secret, but to let the music pour out of her like it used to. She shook her head and turned away. That was a dream from another life. Tonight, she was just the help. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom was full. Over 200 guests filled the space, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of food and drinks. The atmosphere was electric. Everyone was waiting for the main event. The performance was scheduled for 9 o'clock, and people kept glancing at the piano with excitement. Mrs. Belmont stood near the entrance, greeting guests with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She looked calm on the outside, but Maria could tell she was nervous. She kept checking her phone. She kept looking at the door. She kept whispering to her assistant, a young woman who followed her everywhere with a clipboard and a worried expression. At 8:30, something changed. Maria noticed it right away. Mrs. Belmont's smile disappeared. Her face went pale. She grabbed her assistant's arm and pulled her into the hallway. Maria pretended to adjust a flower arrangement nearby, close enough to hear what was being said. "What do you mean he is not coming?" Mrs. Belmont's voice was sharp, but she was trying to keep it quiet. "The performance is in 30 minutes. The assistant looked like she wanted to disappear. "His flight was canceled, ma'am. Bad weather. He tried to get another one, but there was nothing available. He called 5 minutes ago. He is still at the airport." Mrs. Belmont's hands were shaking. "This cannot be happening. Do you understand what this means? I told everyone. Everyone. They are all here to see him play. What am I supposed to do now?" The assistant had no answer. She just stood there, clutching her clipboard like it could protect her from her boss's anger. Maria watched as Mrs. Belmont took a deep breath and tried to compose herself. But the panic was clear in her eyes. This was a disaster. The kind of disaster that would be talked about for years. The kind of disaster that would ruin her reputation. She could already imagine the whispers, the laughs behind her back, the social pages writing about the night. Everything went wrong at the Belmont estate. For the next 15 minutes, chaos unfolded behind the scenes. Mrs. Belmont made phone call after phone call, trying to find a replacement. A local pianist, a music teacher, anyone who could sit at that piano and play something decent. But it was Saturday night. Everyone was booked. Everyone was busy. Everyone said no. The clock on the wall showed 8:50. 10 minutes until the performance was supposed to start. Mrs. Belmont looked like she was about to cry. Her perfect makeup was starting to crack. Her perfect hair was coming loose, and her perfect evening was falling apart. That was when she did something she had never done before. She turned to her staff, the kitchen workers, the waiters, the cleaners. Everyone who was working that night was called into a small room off the main hallway. About 20 people stood there, confused and curious. Maria stood at the back, near the door, trying to stay invisible, like she always did. Mrs. Belmont looked at them with desperation in her eyes. Gone was the cold, demanding woman they all knew. In her place was someone who was scared and out of options. "I need your help," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "The pianist cannot make it tonight. I have tried everything. I have called everyone I know, but there is no one available." She paused and took a shaky breath. "I am asking if any of you know how to play the piano. Even a little bit. Even just a simple song. Anything at all." The room went completely silent. People looked at each other with wide eyes. Some shook their heads. Others looked down at the floor. A waiter laughed nervously and said he could barely play the radio, let alone a piano. No one stepped forward. Maria's heart started beating faster. She could feel it pounding in her chest like a drum. Her hands, which had been still at her sides, began to tremble. A voice in her head screamed at her to stay quiet, to stay invisible, to let this moment pass like all the others. But another voice, softer and older, whispered something different. It whispered about her grandmother's piano and the songs she used to play. It whispered about Antoni and the way he used to close his eyes when he listened to her perform. It whispered about all the years she had spent hiding. All the music trapped inside her with nowhere to go. Mrs. Belmont was looking around the room, her eyes moving from face to face, searching for any sign of hope. When her gaze passed over Maria, it did not even pause. Why would it? Maria was just the cleaning lady, the woman who had been invisible for 12 years. But then something happened, something that Maria herself did not expect. Her hand moved. Slowly, shakily. It rose from her side and lifted into the air. Everyone turned to look at her. The room fell even more silent, if that was possible. Mrs. Belmont's eyes narrowed with confusion and doubt. She looked Maria up and down, taking in the simple uniform, the rough hands, the tired face. "You?" Mrs. Belmont said. It was not really a question. It was more like disbelief given a voice. "You can play the piano?" Maria opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. Her throat was tight. Her whole body was shaking. She had not told anyone about her past. Not in 12 years. Not a single soul in this country knew who she used to be. I used to play," Maria finally said. Her voice was small and uncertain. "A long time ago. Before I came here." Mrs. Belmont stared at her for a long moment. The doubt was written all over her face. This woman? This cleaning lady who had worked in her house for over a decade? How was that possible? But the clock was ticking. The guests were waiting. And there was no one else. "Fine," Mrs. Belmont said, though she did not look happy about it. "You will have to do. Just play something. Anything. Keep them entertained until I can figure out what to say." Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak again. Her legs felt like they were made of water as she followed Mrs. Belmont back toward the ballroom. The other staff members watched her go, with shock on their faces. Some of them whispered to each other. Who was this woman? What was she about to do? As Maria walked through the hallway, she could hear the noise of the crowd in the ballroom. 200 people waiting. 200 people expecting a world-famous pianist. And instead, they were going to get her. A refugee. A cleaner. A woman who had not touched a piano properly in over 15 years. She stopped at the entrance to the ballroom and looked at the grand piano sitting in the center of the room. The spotlight was already on it, making it glow like something from a dream. Her dream. The dream she had buried so deep she thought it was gone forever. Maria took a deep breath. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was still pounding. But somewhere inside her, in a place she had forgotten existed, a tiny spark of something came alive. It was not confidence. It was not courage. It was something simpler than that. It was hope. And with that hope burning quietly in her chest, Maria stepped into the light. The walk from the doorway to the piano felt like the longest walk of Maria's life. It was only about 30 steps, but each one felt like a mile. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room turning toward her. She could hear the confused murmurs spreading through the crowd like ripples in water. Who is that? Is that one of the staff? What is she doing? Maria kept her head down and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Her worn black shoes made soft sounds on the polished floor. Her uniform suddenly felt too tight, too plain, too wrong for this moment. She did not belong here. Not in this spotlight. Not in front of these people. What was she thinking? A woman in a red dress laughed quietly and whispered something to the man beside her. Maria heard the word maid and felt her cheeks burn with shame. She almost stopped. She almost turned around and walked right back out. But something kept her moving forward. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was the memory of her grandmother's voice, telling her all those years ago that music was a gift. And gifts were meant to be shared. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, just looking at it. Up close, it was even more beautiful than she remembered. The black wood gleamed under the spotlight. The keys were perfect, white and black, waiting silently for someone to bring them to life. Maria ran her fingers along the edge of the piano, feeling the smooth surface beneath her rough hands. The room had gone mostly quiet now. People were watching with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. Some looked annoyed that their evening was being interrupted by this unexpected turn of events. Others looked amused, like they were watching a joke unfold. A few checked their phones. Already bored before she had even started. Mrs. Belmont stood near the side of the room, her arms crossed, her face tight with worry. She gave Maria a small nod that seemed to say, "Just get on with it." There was no encouragement in her eyes. Only fear that this was about to be a disaster. Maria pulled out the bench and sat down slowly. The leather was cool beneath her. She placed her feet on the pedals and felt a jolt of familiarity run through her body. How many times had she sat like this? Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. But that was so long ago. Another lifetime. Another person. She placed her hands on the keys and felt them tremble. Her fingers looked so different now. They used to be smooth and strong. Now they were rough and tired, marked by years of hard work. Could these hands still make music? Real music? Or had that part of her died, along with everything else she had lost? The room waited. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered impatiently. Maria could feel the doubt pressing down on her like a heavy weight. These people did not believe in her. Why would they? They did not know her. They did not see her. To them, she was nobody. But then Maria closed her eyes, and something shifted inside her. She was not in the ballroom anymore. She was back in her grandmother's house, sitting on that old wooden bench with the cracked seat. She could smell the bread baking in the kitchen. She could hear the birds singing outside the window. She could feel her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. "Play from here," her grandmother used to say, touching Maria's chest right above her heart. "Not from your head, not from your fingers, from here. That is where the real music lives." Maria took a deep breath. She let her shoulders drop. She let her hands relax. And then, without thinking, without planning, she began to play. The first note rang out clear and true. It hung in the air like a single drop of rain before a storm. Then came the second note, and the third. And suddenly, the music was flowing out of her like water, breaking through a dammed dot. She played Chopin. The Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was the piece she had performed at her first big concert all those years ago. The piece that had made her famous in her home country. The piece that Antoni had loved more than any other. He used to sit in the front row and close his eyes, and when she finished, there would be tears on his cheeks. The music started soft and gentle, like a whisper, like a secret being shared between old friends. Maria's fingers moved across the keys with a grace she thought she had forgotten. The notes came back to her like they had been waiting all this time, hiding inside her, ready to be released in the ballroom. Something was happening. The whispers stopped. The phones were put away. The woman in the red dress, who had laughed earlier now, stood frozen with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. One by one, the guests turned toward the piano, drawn by the sound like moths to a flame. The music grew stronger. Maria leaned into the keys, letting the emotions pour out of her. All the pain she had buried. All the grief she had never allowed herself to feel. All the loneliness of the past 15 years. It all came out through her fingers, transformed into something beautiful. She played the part of the ballad where the melody turns dark and stormy. Her hands flew across the keys with a power that surprised even her. The notes crashed and swelled like waves against rocks. People in the audience gasped. A woman near the front put her hand over her mouth. A man in a gray suit wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Maria did not see any of this. Her eyes were still closed. She was somewhere else entirely. She was walking through the streets of her old city before the war. She was dancing with Antoni at their wedding. She was sitting beside her mother, helping her knead bread in the morning light. She was everywhere and nowhere. She was lost in the music, and for the first time in 15 years, she felt found. The ballad moved into its final section. The storm faded. The darkness lifted. The melody became tender again, full of longing and hope. Maria's fingers slowed, drawing out each note like it was precious, like it was the last note she would ever play. Tears were streaming down her face now. She did not try to stop them. She did not even notice them. All she knew was the music and the feelings it carried. All the love she had lost. All the dreams that had been taken from her. All the years she had spent being invisible. It was all there in those final notes. When she played the last chord, she held it for a long moment, letting it ring out through the ballroom. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. Her whole body was shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The room was completely silent. Maria opened her eyes and looked up. She expected to see bored faces, annoyed faces, people ready to clap politely and move on with their evening. Instead, she saw something she had not seen in a very long time. She saw tears. The woman in the red dress was crying openly, her makeup running down her cheeks. The man in the gray suit had his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Mrs. Belmont stood frozen in place, her hand pressed against her chest, her eyes wide with shock. All around the room, people were staring at Maria like they were seeing her for the first time. Like they were seeing a ghost. Like they were witnessing something they would never forget. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so deep that Maria could hear her own breathing. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started to clap dot. He was a single person at first. Slow, steady claps that echoed through the ballroom. Then another person joined. And another. And another. The clapping grew louder and faster, until it became a roar. People rose from their seats one by one until the entire room was standing. A standing ovation for her, for the cleaning lady, for the invisible woman who had just shown them her soul. Maria sat at the piano, overwhelmed and trembling, as the applause washed over her like a wave. She did not know what to do. She did not know what to say. All she could do was sit there and cry and wonder if this was real or just another dream that would disappear when she woke up. But it was real. It was all real, and it was only the beginning. The applause did not stop. It kept going and going, filling the ballroom with a sound Maria had not heard in 15 years. The sound of people clapping for her. The sound of recognition. The sound of being seen. She sat at the piano bench, unable to move. Her hands were still shaking in her lap. Her face was wet with tears. She did not remember crying. Everything felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. This could not be happening. Not to her. Not after all this time. People were calling out to her, shouting things like, "Bravo," and "beautiful," and more. But Maria could not hear the words clearly. They blended together into a wall of noise that pressed against her from all sides. She felt dizzy. She felt scared. She felt alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. Slowly, she became aware of someone walking toward her. She looked up and saw Mrs. Belmont approaching the piano. The woman's face was different now. The coldness was gone. The doubt was gone. In their place was something Maria had never seen before. It looked almost like respect. Mrs. Belmont stopped a few feet away from the piano. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at Maria like she was seeing her for the first time. And in a way, she was. For 12 years, Maria had been part of the background. A face in the uniform. A pair of hands that cleaned and served and disappeared. But now, sitting at that piano with tears on her cheeks, she was something else entirely. "I had no idea," Mrs. Belmont said. Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the noise of the crowd. "All these years, and I had no idea." Maria did not know what to say. She just nodded, her throat too tight for words. The applause finally began to fade as people returned to their seats. But the energy in the room had completely changed. The bored, polished atmosphere from before was gone. In its place was something electric. Something real. People were leaning toward each other, whispering excitedly. They kept looking at Maria with wonder in their eyes. A waiter Maria had worked with for years came over and offered her a glass of water. His name was David, and he was a quiet young man who usually kept to himself. But now he was smiling at her with tears in his own eyes. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," he said softly. "I had no idea you could do that." Maria took the water with trembling hands. "Neither did I," she whispered back. "Not anymore." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Maria was guided to a chair near the side of the room, where she sat in a daze while the gala continued around her. But nothing was the same as before. People kept coming up to her. Rich, important people in their expensive clothes. They shook her hand. They thanked her. They asked her questions she could barely answer. "Where did you learn to play like that? How long have you been playing? Why are you working as a cleaner when you have a gift like this?" Maria gave short, simple answers. She told them she used to play back home. She told them it was a long time ago. She did not tell them about the war. She did not tell them about Antoni. She did not tell them about the years of silence and grief. Those stories were too heavy for this glittering room. But there was one person who wanted to know more. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. He wore a simple black suit, not as flashy as the others, but there was something about him that commanded attention. He had been standing near the back of the room during Maria's performance, and she had noticed him even through her tears. He had not clapped like the others. He had just stood there, perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that was almost unsettling. Now he was walking toward her. He moved through the crowd with purpose, gently excusing himself as he passed the other guests. When he reached Maria, he did not shake her hand or offer empty compliments. He simply pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. "That piece you played," he said, "the Chopin Ballade. I have heard it performed by some of the greatest pianists in the world. I have heard it at concert halls in Vienna, Paris, New York." He paused and looked at her with those steady, kind eyes. "I have never heard it played like that." Maria did not know how to respond. She just looked at him, waiting. "My name is Richard," he said. "I am a music producer. I have spent my whole life searching for artists with something real to say. Something honest. Something true." He leaned forward slightly. "What you played tonight was not just music. It was a story. Your story. I could hear it in every note." Maria felt something stir inside her. A flutter of fear mixed with something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. "I do not play anymore," she said quietly. "Tonight was... I do not know what tonight was. But it was not planned. It just happened." Richard nodded slowly. The best things in life are never planned. They just happen. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card. "I am working on a documentary. It is about artists who are lost to the world. People whose talents were hidden or forgotten or taken away by circumstances beyond their control. When I heard you play, I knew immediately that you belonged in this project." Maria stared at the card in his hand. It was such a small thing. Just a piece of paper with a name and a phone number. But it felt like so much more. It felt like a door. A door she had thought was locked forever. "I am just a cleaner," she said. The words came out automatically, the same words she had been telling herself for 15 years. "I clean houses. That is what I do now." Richard shook his head gently. "No, that is what you do to survive. But it is not who you are." He pressed the card into her hand. "Who you are is the woman I just heard play. The woman who made 200 strangers cry. The woman who turned a room full of skeptics into believers with nothing but her hands and her heart." Maria looked down at the card. Her vision blurred with fresh tears. "Think about it," Richard said, standing up. "Take all the time you need. But please do think about it. The world needs to hear your story. And more importantly, I think you need to tell it." He gave her a small nod and walked away. Disappearing into the crowd, Maria sat there for a long time, holding that card like it was made of gold. Around her, the party continued. People laughed and drank and talked about business deals and vacation plans. But Maria was somewhere else. She was thinking about her grandmother and the old piano with the chipped keys. She was thinking about Antoni and the way he used to believe in her when she did not believe in herself. She was thinking about all the years she had spent being invisible, and the one night when everything changed. Later, when the gala was over and the guests had gone home, Maria helped clean up the ballroom like she always did. She swept the floors. She collected the empty glasses. She straightened the chairs. But every few minutes, she would stop and look at the grand piano sitting silently in the center of the room. It looked different to her now. It was no longer just a beautiful piece of furniture she was not allowed to touch. It was a bridge between who she had been and who she might still become. When she finally left the estate that night, the sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Maria walked to the bus stop with tired legs and a racing mind. In her pocket, She could feel the edge of Richard's card pressing against her hip. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if she was brave enough to take this chance. But for the first time in 15 years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. A future where she was not invisible. A future where her music mattered. A future where the girl with golden hands might play again. The bus arrived, and Maria climbed on board. She found a seat by the window and leaned her head against the cold glass. As the city rolled past outside, she closed her eyes and whispered a single word into the quiet morning air. Antoni. It was not a prayer. It was not a question. It was a promise. She was going to try. 3 months later, Maria stood backstage at Carnegie Hall. She could hear the crowd on the other side of the curtain. Thousands of people filling the seats, waiting to see her, waiting to hear her play. The sound of their voices blended together into a low hum that vibrated through the walls. It was the same sound she remembered from her concerts back home, all those years ago. But this was different. This was bigger. This was something she had never even dared to dream. Her hands were shaking again. They had been shaking all day, all week, really, ever since she arrived in New York and saw her name on the billboard outside the concert hall. Maria, just Maria, no last name needed. Because now, somehow, everyone knew who she was. The documentary had changed everything. Richard had kept his promise. He had interviewed Maria for hours, asking her questions about her childhood, her training, her dreams. He had asked about the war and the escape and the years of silence. At first, Maria did not want to talk about those things. They were too painful, too raw. But Richard was patient. He never pushed. He just listened. And slowly, Maria found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about her grandmother and the old piano. She told him about winning the competition and moving to the capital. She told him about Antoni and their wedding and the way he used to cry when she played. And she told him about the night the bombs came and the 3 days of walking and the cold morning when Antoni closed his eyes for the last time. By the time she finished, they were both crying. The documentary was called The Invisible Woman. It told Maria's story from beginning to end. From the girl with golden hands to the refugee who scrubbed floors, to the night at the Belmont estate when everything changed. Richard had found old photos of Maria from her concert days. He had tracked down recordings of her performances that Maria thought were lost forever. He had even found people from her old country who remembered her, who spoke about her talent and her kindness and the tragedy of what had happened. When the documentary was released online, it spread like wildfire. Within a week, millions of people had watched it. Maria's story was shared on social media, on news programs, on radio shows around the world. People wrote to her from every corner of the globe. They sent letters and emails and messages telling her how much her story had touched them, how it had made them cry, how it had given them hope. A woman from Japan wrote that she had given up painting 20 years ago after her husband passed away. But after watching Maria's story, she had picked up her brushes again. A man from Brazil wrote that he had been hiding his love of music from his family because they thought it was not a real career, but Maria had inspired him to follow his heart. A teenager from England wrote that she had been feeling invisible at school, like nobody saw her. But Maria's story reminded her that her time would come. These messages meant more to Maria than any amount of money or fame. They reminded her that music was not just about performing. It was about connecting. It was about touching hearts. It was about showing people that they were not alone. The concert offers started pouring in after the documentary went viral. At first, Maria said no to all of them. She was not ready. She had not performed properly in 15 years. What if she failed? What if she disappointed everyone? What if the magic of that night at the gala had been a one-time thing that could never be repeated? But Richard believed in her, and slowly, Maria began to believe in herself too. She started practicing again, every day for hours at a time. Richard arranged for her to use a studio with a beautiful grand piano, and Maria would sit there from morning until night, relearning the pieces she used to know by heart. Her fingers were stiff at first. They stumbled over notes they once played with ease. But day by day, week by week, the music came back, like an old friend returning home after a long journey. And now, here she was. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world, about to walk onto that stage and play for thousands of people. A young woman with a headset approached her. 5 minutes, Maria. Are you ready? Maria took a deep breath. Was she ready? She did not know, but she nodded anyway. She looked down at her hands. They were still rough from years of cleaning. The lines and calluses had not disappeared just because her life had changed. But they looked different to her now. They were not the hands of a maid. They were the hands of a survivor. The hands of a woman who had lost everything and found a way to rebuild. On her wrist, she wore a simple bracelet. It was old and worn. The gold faded with time. Antoni had given it to her on their wedding day. She had kept it hidden in a drawer for 15 years, unable to look at it without crying. But tonight, she wore it proudly. Because tonight, she was not just playing for the audience. She was playing for him. The stagehand gave her the signal. It was time. Maria walked through the curtain and onto the stage. The lights hit her face, warm and bright. The audience rose to their feet before she even reached the piano. They were already clapping, already cheering, already welcoming her like she was one of their own. She looked out at the sea of faces and felt tears prick her eyes. How many of these people had watched her documentary? How many of them knew her story? How many of them had cried along with her and cheered for her and hoped for this moment as much as she had? All of them, she realized. Every single one. Maria sat down at the piano. A Steinway, just like the one at the Belmont estate. She placed her hands on the keys and felt that familiar electricity run through her veins. The audience fell silent. 2,000 people holding their breath, waiting. She began to play. The music poured out of her like it had that night at the gala. But it was different this time. It was stronger, fuller, more alive. Because Maria was not just playing from memory anymore. She was playing from a place of healing, a place of hope, a place where the pain of the past had been transformed into something beautiful. She played for her grandmother, who had first placed her tiny hands on the piano keys. She played for her parents, who had sacrificed everything to give her a chance at her dreams. She played for Antoni, who had loved her music almost as much as he loved her. And she played for herself, for the girl who had been lost, for the woman who had been invisible, for the artist who had finally been found. When the last note faded into silence, the audience exploded. The sound of their applause was like thunder, like a wave crashing against the shore, like the whole world saying yes. Maria stood up from the bench and bowed, tears streaming down her face. In the front row, she saw a familiar figure, Mrs. Belmont. She had flown all the way to New York for this concert. She was standing with the others, clapping with tears in her own eyes. After the show, she came backstage and embraced Maria like an old friend. "I am so sorry," Mrs. Belmont whispered. "I am so sorry I never saw you." Maria pulled back and smiled. It was a real smile. A smile without bitterness or pain. "You saw me when it mattered most," she said. "That is all that counts." Later that night, Maria stood alone on the empty stage. The audience was gone. The lights were dim. But she was not ready to leave yet. She sat down at the piano one more time and played a soft, quiet melody. A lullaby her grandmother used to sing Dot as the notes drifted through the empty hall. Maria closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness. I did it, Antoni. I found my way back. Somewhere she knew he was listening, and for the first time in 15 years, Maria did not feel invisible anymore. She felt seen. She felt whole. She felt like herself again. The girl with golden hands had finally come home.